She was left to die in the desert because her father called her weak. But when a human scout found her crawling toward a jagged rock, he saw something else entirely. He didn't offer pity. He offered a dangerous truth about power and tradition that would challenge everything she knew about her own worth. The satrap's creed allowed no exceptions. Strength defined worth. Weakness contaminated the bloodline. This was no abstract philosophy. It shaped laws, determined status, and justified exile. Iris's ceremonial markings were not honors. They were brands of shame burned into her skin, declaring her unfit to live among her own kind. Each symbol represented a failure she never chose, a body that betrayed her from birth. Her father spoke the words without looking at her. The bloodline cannot be tainted by weakness. He left her at the edge of the salt flats where the heat rose in visible waves. Her paralyzed legs dragged behind her like dead weight. Each movement ground sand into raw flesh. The desert amplified her condition, turning stillness into a slow execution. This was not banishment. It was a sentence carried out by the environment itself. She remembered the precision of his decision. Guards had positioned her facing the deep wastes where no settlement stood. They left no water, no shade, no chance. The political structure of Eris demanded such clean severance. A flawed heir could inspire dissent, encourage weakness in others. Perfection was the only currency of power. Her death would be a lesson written in sun-bleached bones. Iris contemplated the coming end. Dehydration already tightened her throat. The heat pressed down, relentless. But the physical pain was secondary. The deeper agony was the betrayal. Her father's conviction was absolute. He saw her existence as a flaw in an otherwise pure line. To him this was necessity. To her it was abandonment dressed as duty. Her eyes fixed on a jagged rock formation in the distance. It was too far. She knew that. But she began to crawl anyway. The movement was slow, painful, inefficient. Sand stuck to the sweat on her arms. Each pull forward was an act of defiance. The system designed to erase her demanded she accept her worthlessness. That rock became her refusal. It was a pointless destination, but the act of moving toward it was a spark. A silent no in a world that only understood yes. The Baron's logic was airtight within his culture. He protected not just a throne, but an ideology. Strength preserved order. Weakness invited chaos. Letting nature remove his daughter was cleaner than a blade, more dignified for the bloodline. It let the universe confirm his judgment. He believed he was being merciful in his ruthlessness, sparing her a public execution, giving her the freedom to choose how long she struggled. She understood his reasoning. That was the cruelest part. She had been taught the same values. In her darkest moments, she wondered if he was right, if her life truly had no value. But as her arms trembled and her vision blurred, she kept moving. Not toward survival, but toward agency. Her final act would be a choice. She would die reaching for something, not waiting for nothing. The jagged rock stood as a testament to a will her father never calculated. The heat made the air shimmer. Iris dragged herself forward, arms trembling. Her legs lay useless behind her. Sand worked its way into every scrape on her elbows. Each movement was a fresh lesson in friction. She kept her eyes on the jagged rock. It stood dark against the pale sand. The distance felt impossible. She measured it in breaths. 10 breaths equaled 1 body length. She counted them, then started over. The numbers grew harder to keep straight. Her ceremonial marks burned. The sun heated the metal inlays until they seared her skin. They were meant to honor strength. Now they branded her with pain. Each symbol felt like a hot coal pressed into her flesh. Her legs were more than dead weight. They trapped heat against the sand. The fabric of her trousers caught and held the sun's energy. It cooked the still muscles beneath. She tried shifting them, but they wouldn't obey. They remained heavy, hot, and alien. Thirst began as a dryness in her mouth. Now it was a tightness in her throat. Her tongue felt thick. She knew the signs. Hallucinations would come next. Then organ failure. The desert offered no quick end. It took its time. Her thoughts turned inward. She searched her memories. Was there weakness in how she laughed? In how she preferred reading to combat drills? Her father's judgment echoed in her mind. She picked apart every childhood moment, looking for the flaw he saw. This was the final test. The system wanted her to accept their verdict, to lie down and let the heat take her. Dying quietly would prove them right. Her struggle was a rebellion in itself. Each inch gained was a denial of their values. The sand under her hands shifted. One pull forward, then another. Her muscles burned with fatigue. She focused on the rhythm. Drag, breathe, rest. Drag, breathe, rest. It became her whole world. The rock seemed no closer. She remembered cool halls and shaded gardens. The memory of water made her throat ache. Her people prized endurance. They trained from childhood to withstand hardship. But this was different. This was not a test to build strength. This was disposal. Her arms gave out. She lay face down in the sand. It stuck to her sweat-damp skin. For a moment, she considered stopping. Letting go would be easier. The heat felt almost soothing when she didn't fight it. Then she thought of her father's face. Cold. Certain. She pushed up again. Her arms shook, but they held. She dragged herself another few inches. The rock remained distant, but her movement itself became the point. The sun climbed higher. Shadows shrank to nothing. There was no cover, no reprieve. Her body was both her prison and her burden. She carried it across the sand, inch by painful inch. Each movement was a quiet refutation of the verdict passed upon her. The desert demanded surrender. She answered with motion. The wind whispered over the dunes, carrying sand in soft ripples. Ryden moved without sound, his boots finding purchase where others would sink. He saw the shape in the distance, a body dragging itself across the burning ground. He paused, assessing. Not a corpse. Not yet. He approached from downwind. His eyes scanned the terrain, noting the lack of tracks around her. She had been placed here. Not lost. Abandoned. He saw the ceremonial markings on her skin, now burning under the sun. He recognized the work of a culture that prized perfection above all else. He stood over her, blocking the sun. She flinched but didn't look up. Her focus remained on the distant rock formation. Her arms shook with strain. Blood darkened the sand beneath her elbows. Ryden, he said. His voice was low, matter-of-fact. Former scout of Earth's interstellar core. Now just a wanderer. She stopped moving. Her breath came in ragged pulls. She didn't speak. Didn't ask for help. That told him more than any plea could. He studied her paralyzed legs, the determined set of her shoulders. Your people waste resources, he observed. There was no judgment in his tone. Just fact. His time with Earth's forces had taught him to see value where others saw liability. A broken tool could be reforged. A damaged vehicle could be stripped for parts. Life was the ultimate resource. Wasting it was poor strategy. He knew the risk. Helping her made him a target. The same power that left her here would come looking. They wouldn't allow their judgment to be questioned. Their entire system depended on the finality of their decisions. He watched her drag herself another inch. The movement was pure will. Her body had nothing left to give. Yet she moved. That was data. That was potential. His decision wasn't about compassion. It was about rejecting flawed logic. A culture that discarded useful assets was a culture with weak foundations. They saw her paralysis as a limit. He saw it as a variable, one that could be worked around, compensated for. He knelt beside her. The sand was hot through his trousers. They'll come back to check, he said. They always do. She turned her head slightly. Her eyes were clouded with pain but sharp with understanding. She knew the rules of her world better than he did. He considered the angles. Carrying her would slow him down. Her people used heat signature hunters. They would scan for 2 bodies instead of 1. The desert offered little cover. But staying here meant certain death for her. And wasting a resource offended his practical nature. He saw the blood trail she left in the sand. Each drop represented calories expended, determination measured in physical cost. That was a currency he understood. Willpower converted into motion. I can move you, he said. Or leave you. Your choice. She looked at the rock again, then at him. Her nod was almost imperceptible. He slid his arms under her shoulders and knees. Her body was lighter than he expected. The dead weight of her legs made the balance tricky. He adjusted his grip, redistributing the load. He started walking toward the mineral ravines to the east. The sand gave way under his feet. Each step required calculation. He moved with steady purpose, his eyes scanning the horizon. The hunt would begin soon. He had what they wanted. Now he had to keep it. Ryden adjusted his grip as he walked. The woman's body was a dead weight in his arms, but he carried her with an economy of motion. He didn't look at her when he spoke. Your people's way is wasteful, Iris stiffened. Her voice came out thin, dried by the air. It is necessary. Weakness spreads. My father protects the bloodline. No, Raiden said. The word was flat, final. He protects an idea, and he's bad at it. She tried to shift, pain tightening her features. You don't understand our ways. Strength is everything. I understand throwing away something useful because it looks broken. His tone held no anger, only assessment. Seen it before. On Earth we had a saying, strength adapts. It doesn't just break what doesn't fit. He moved around a patch of loose sand, his steps careful. The heat was a solid thing now, pressing down. Her breathing was shallow. He could feel the tremors running through her. Your father's strength is fragile, he continued. It has to remove anything that challenges it. That's not power. That's fear. Iris was silent for a long moment. The truth of his words seeped in, slower than the heat. She had been taught that their way was absolute, unquestionable. This human spoke of it like a flawed strategy, a tactical error. He did what was right, she insisted, but the certainty had bled out of her voice. Raiden's arms tightened slightly, not in anger, but to secure his hold. Right for who? For a system that can't handle a girl who can't walk. That sounds like the weak link to me. He wasn't trying to convince her. He was stating facts as he saw them. A culture that couldn't integrate difference was a culture with a single point of failure. He'd seen empires fall for less. Iris looked at the desert stretching out around them. Everything was designed to eliminate the imperfect. The heat, the sand, the lack of water. It was a world built for a single type of strength. Her father's decree was just an extension of that environment. He fears what I represent, she said, the realization dawning quietly. Yes, Raiden agreed. Change. The word hung between them. It was a concept her culture had no room for. Change was decay. It was corruption. But this outsider framed it as evolution, as necessity. Her whole life she had believed her body was a betrayal of her lineage, a flaw to be hidden, then removed. Now, carried in the arms of a stranger, she considered a different possibility. What if the flaw was not in her body, but in the lens through which it was seen? Raiden shifted her weight again, his movements efficient. He wasn't gentle, but he was careful. He treated her brokenness as a condition to be managed, not a verdict to be accepted. The foundation of her world, built over a lifetime of teaching, developed its first crack. It was a small thing, a whisper of doubt, but it grew with every step he took, with every blunt, truthful word. He wasn't offering her pity or salvation. He was offering her a new equation, one where her value wasn't predetermined by the old rules. Tiny specks appeared against the sun. They moved in a pattern, a grid sweep. Iris's breath caught. She knew that flight path. Heat signature hunters, she said, her voice tight. They'll have us in minutes. Raiden didn't look up. His eyes scanned the terrain ahead. He saw the landscape not as sand and rock, but as a field of variables. Cover, exposure, angles of approach. He'd mapped worse battlefields with less time. His grip on her adjusted, not from fear, but from a need for better balance. He started moving faster, his pace still measured. Panic wasted energy. He didn't have any to waste. He angled toward a deep ravine to the east. The walls were streaked with dark mineral deposits. The ore there, he said, more to himself than to her. It scatters long-range scans, confuses thermal. It was a temporary solution. The drones would get closer, but it bought time. And time was the only currency that mattered now. The drones were her father's will-made metal. Their presence meant he had ordered a confirmation scan. He needed to see her remains. Proof his judgment was sound. Their pursuit transformed her from a discarded heir into an active problem. She was a loose end that threatened the clean narrative of her weakness. Her survival, however unlikely, was a political threat. It suggested his system had a flaw. A low hum grew audible over the wind. One drone broke from the formation, diving lower. A thin red beam lanced out, searing the sand 10 meters to their left. A warning shot. Or poor aim. The heat from the impact washed over them, a dry, violent wave. Iris flinched. The pilots. They enjoy this. It was a game to them. Hunting the condemned was a privilege for the most loyal. A reward for those who embraced the creed without question. Raiden didn't reply. His focus was on the ravine's entrance, still 50 meters away. He calculated the drone's turn radius, the time between scans. Each pass of the laser beam tightened the noose. The margin for error shrank to nothing. He moved in a low, quick crouch now, using what little cover the rolling dunes provided. His body shielded hers from the worst of the sun, but it also made him a larger target. The drones were getting smarter, adjusting their pattern, learning his evasion tactics. This wasn't mindless machinery. There was intelligence behind the hunt, a cruel curiosity. The lead drone fired again. This time the beam hit a rock formation ahead of them, shattering it into molten fragments. The shockwave rattled through the ground. They were being herded, pushed away from the ravine's safety. Raiden changed course abruptly, cutting right toward a narrower, steeper crack in the earth. It was a risk. The opening was tight. If they got stuck, they were finished. But it was also less likely to be covered by their sweeping grid. He was betting on their predictability, their reliance on standard procedure. The technology hunting them was an extension of a single, uncompromising will. It was designed to eliminate deviation, to enforce a perfect, sterile order. Every sensor, every weapon served that ideal. Their flight was more than an escape. It was a challenge to the very principle of control. They weren't just running from drones. They were running from an idea that could not tolerate their existence. Raiden moved into the edge of the ravine. The steep walls offered immediate cover from the drone's line of sight. He set Iris down gently against the shaded stone. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. Every second counted. He scanned the ground at his feet. The soil was loose, rich with dark metallic dust. He kicked it hard, sending a cloud of fine particles into the air. It hung there, shimmering. Optical sensors would read it as a distortion, a blur. It wouldn't stop them, but it would slow their targeting. He counted in his head. The drones completed a thermal sweep every 47 seconds. He had learned their rhythm. In the 5-second gap between scans, he moved. He lifted Iris and carried her 10 paces further into the ravine's shadow. Then he stopped, became still. He held his breath, minimizing his heat signature. Iris watched him, her eyes wide but understanding. She had gone utterly motionless in his arms. The ravine was a double-edged refuge. The rock walls blocked direct sunlight, but they also trapped the day's accumulated heat. Their bodies, already stressed, now stewed in a sweltering pocket of air. The thermal confusion might mask them, but the stagnant warmth was its own kind of torture. Dehydration would accelerate here. Iris raised a weak hand, pointing toward a section of the ravine floor. "The sand there is firmer," she whispered, her voice cracking. "It's packed by runoff. The other side is loose. It will slide." It was a small thing. Local knowledge. An understanding of how this land behaved. Raiden altered his path, trusting her guidance. His boots found solid purchase where he would have expected to sink. This was the first true collaboration. His tactical mind, honed across star systems, merged with her innate sense of this world. He provided the strategy. She provided the terrain data. It was a fragile partnership built on immediate, desperate need. The drones adapted. Their humming changed pitch. They ceased their broad grid search and began a focused, converging pattern. They weren't just following programmed algorithms anymore. A live operator was directing them now, reacting to Raiden's evasions. The hunt had become a duel of wits. Each narrow dodge was a move in a silent, deadly game. Raiden pressed deeper into the narrowing crevasse. The mineral dust coated his skin and clothes, a gritty film. His mouth was parched. He hadn't drunk anything since before dawn. The physical cost of each movement was accumulating. His muscles burned. He could feel Iris's weight growing heavier, a sign of his own fading strength. They were spending resources they could not reclaim. Water, energy, hope. The lead drone dropped lower, its sensors whirring as it attempted to peer through the dust cloud. A laser beam lanced out not at them but at the ravine wall above their heads. Chunks of heated rock shattered and rained down. It was a new tactic. Flush them out with a landslide. Force them into the open. Raiden shielded Iris with his body, turning his back to the falling debris. A sharp fragment struck his shoulder. He grunted but didn't falter. He was calculating again. The drones were learning. Their intelligence was being applied in real time, making each second more dangerous than the last. Survival was no longer just about hiding. It was about thinking several moves ahead of an opponent who could change the rules at will. Their escape was a fragile thing, a temporary victory paid for with their own diminishing reserves. The dark shapes rose from the dunes ahead. The Whisper Ruins. Reedon saw them as a tactical asset, not a monument. Legends of curses and hauntings surrounded the place. His own people had similar stories. He knew fear was a tool. It kept the curious away. That made it the perfect shelter. Structure meant walls. Walls meant cover from scans and weapons. The drones would hesitate to follow. Their operators were superstitious. They feared what they couldn't control. Iris looked at the jagged silhouettes. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her memory. Old tales spoken by firelight. Not of monsters, but of guardians. Of power sleeping in the stone. The stories were meant as warnings for children. Now they felt like a different kind of map. The ground near the ruins was treacherous. Sand gave way to brittle, fractured rock. Raiden tested each step. The footing was unstable. One wrong move could send them sliding into a hidden crevice. He studied the architecture as they drew closer. The ruins weren't a random collapse. The angles were too sharp, the patterns too deliberate. This was designed intelligence. A place built with purpose, not born from chance. The fear it inspired was a feature, not a flaw. A defense mechanism that had outlived its builders. He adjusted his grip on Iris, his mind already cataloging entry points, defensible positions, escape routes. The fear that gripped her people was their greatest advantage. It created a blind spot, a place the hunters would be reluctant to enter. Their only other option was the open desert. Certain capture. Certain death. This was the turning point. Step into the unknown or be taken by the known. The choice was clear. He moved toward the darkest opening in the ancient wall. A strange sensation washed over Iris as they crossed the threshold. It wasn't the fear she'd been taught to expect. It was a faint pull, a deep, quiet recognition. The stone felt familiar against her skin. It was cool and strangely smooth, as if it had been worn down by something other than wind. It felt less like entering a tomb and more like approaching a long-sealed door. A part of her, buried under years of conditioning, whispered that she belonged here. Raiden paused inside the entrance. The air changed immediately. The oppressive heat of the desert faded, replaced by a deep, dry coolness. The light from outside didn't penetrate far. Shadows pooled in the corners, thick and liquid. The hum of the drones faded to a distant buzz, then vanished altogether. The silence inside was absolute. It was a different world, a pocket of stillness hidden in the burning wastes. He set Iris down gently, his back against the cool stone. He listened. No scuttling of creatures, no wind, just a profound quiet. The legends of curses were a powerful deterrent. They had just traded one set of risks for another. But these risks were unknown, unmapped. That was better. You can plan for the unknown. You can adapt. You can't plan for a laser beam from a drone you can't outrun. Iris placed her palm flat on the floor. The stone felt alive with a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. It was a frequency below hearing, a hum you felt in your bones. Her grandmother's stories said the old ones spoke through the stone. She had always thought it was a metaphor. Now she wasn't so sure. This sanctuary, born from fear, offered something the desert never could, a chance to breathe, a chance to think. The perceived danger had become their only safe harbor. The air inside the ruins felt different. It was cooler, and beneath the heavy silence was a low hum. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears. You felt it through your boots, in your bones. Raiden stayed still, letting his senses adjust. This wasn't a dead place. It was a waiting one. Iris reached out a hand and touched the wall. The stone was smooth, almost warm. Her fingers traced a pattern carved into its surface. As she did, a faint vibration traveled up her arm. She pulled her hand back, startled. Then she placed it there again. The vibration returned, a soft pulse answering her touch. The old ones built escape routes, she said, her voice soft in the quiet. They answer to intent. She spoke the words as if remembering a lesson from long ago, a story told by her grandmother that she'd never believed until now. Raiden watched her. He saw the faint light in her eyes as she understood. He looked down the corridor ahead. It was dark. Then he took a step forward with a clear thought in his mind. We need a way through. A section of the wall ahead began to glow. A soft blue light illuminated a passage that hadn't been there a moment before. The light only reached as far as they did. When they stopped, it faded. When they moved with purpose, it returned. The architecture was not static. It shifted. It adapted. It read them. Their body heat, their brain waves, the focus of their thoughts. This was technology, but not like any he had seen. It felt less like a machine and more like something alive. A system that had been sleeping, now waking to their presence. Iris's childhood stories were no longer just myths. They were an operating manual. Her grandmother had spoken of stone that listened, of paths that opened for those with clear hearts. She had called it magic. But standing here, feeling the hum in the stone, Iris understood it was something else, a science so advanced it felt like wonder. The ruins were testing them. They provided shelter, but they demanded something in return. Clarity, purpose, a focused mind. It wouldn't respond to fear or desperation, only intention. Ryden moved cautiously. He kept his thoughts directed. Safe path, cover, water. The blue light would flare brighter when his aim was clear. It would dim when his mind wandered to the drones outside, to their thirst, to the pain in his shoulder. The place was teaching them how to use it. It was a dialogue, a negotiation with an intelligence built into the very rock. He saw how the stone seemed to flow in places, like liquid that had been frozen midstream. There were no sharp angles, no hard edges. Everything was curved, organic. It felt grown more than built. The line between what was machine and what was natural had been erased here. This was the work of a culture that didn't just build things. They grew them. They coded intention into matter itself. The technology was a form of biofeedback. It responded to their biological signals, their mental state. This was beyond any smart material from his own world. This was integration, a unity of mind, body, and environment. It made their previous struggles seem primitive. Fighting over strength and weakness in the sand. This place operated on a different principle entirely. It asked not what you were, but what you intended to become. The old ones hadn't built a tomb. They had built a school, and the first lesson was learning how to ask for what you needed. The blue glow came from a sunken chamber. The water wasn't water. It was thick, viscous. It clung to the stone edges of the pool like syrup. The light came from within it, a soft luminescence that pulsed gently. Ryden knelt at the edge. The burns on his arm from the drone's near miss still stung. He dipped his fingers into the substance. It was cool, not cold. The light seemed to gather around his injured skin. The redness faded. The pain dulled, then vanished. The tissue smoothed over in moments.
It wasn't healing.
It was rewriting. Iris watched from a few feet away. She didn't move. Her hands were clenched in her lap. This was everything her people feared. Change, transformation, the unknown. What if it rejected her? What if it looked at her broken body and found it as worthless as her father had? The pool represented a test she wasn't sure she could face. Failure here would confirm every cruel word he'd ever spoken. Ryden drank a handful of the liquid. It wasn't wet. It was smooth and slightly sweet. His thirst vanished. The gnawing hunger in his stomach quieted. The substance didn't just heal. It nourished. It fed the body directly, bypassing normal digestion. He felt strength returning to his tired muscles. Energy flowed back into him. This was more than a medicine. It was a complete sustenance system. The luminescence came from life. Billions of microscopic organisms inhabited the pool. They were a form of ancient biotechnology. They responded to biological signals, to injury, to need. They didn't think. They reacted. They read damage on a cellular level and worked to correct it. This was not magic. It was science preserved across thousands of years. A living technology that had waited in the dark for someone who understood how to use it. Iris finally moved. She dragged herself forward, her arms trembling. She stopped at the pool's edge. She looked at her legs, lifeless, useless. Then she looked at the glowing water. She made her choice. She plunged her hands into the substance. The light swarmed around her fingers. It felt like 1,000 tiny pinpricks. A gentle energy. She leaned forward and pushed her legs into the pool. The sensation was immediate. A deep internal tingling. A feeling she had not known in years. It started in her toes. A faint prickling like a limb waking from sleep. It traveled up her calves. The muscles twitched. Involuntary spasm. It wasn't pain. It was activation. Nerves that had been silent for a lifetime began to fire. The organisms in the water were communicating with her body. They were mapping the damage. They were rebuilding connections. This was the absolute opposite of her father's world. His culture prized static perfection. It feared adaptation. It eliminated anything that deviated from the ideal. This pool was change itself. It was adaptation. It took what was broken and found a way to make it work again. It didn't see her paralysis as a flaw. It saw it as a condition, a problem with a potential solution. Her worth was not predetermined here. It was a variable the technology was actively recalculating. She felt a warmth spread through her legs. The tingling became a steady hum of sensation. It was the first physical challenge to everything she had been taught. The satrap's definition of impossibility was being rewritten in real time, in the flesh of his own daughter. The pool was not just healing her body, it was dismantling an ideology. The central chamber held a stone dais at its heart. Spirals were cut deep into its surface, surrounding a shallow pool filled with the same glowing liquid they had found before. The light pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. The air hummed with a low frequency that made their teeth ache. This was the core of the ruins, the source of the vibration they had felt since entering. Boots scraped on stone in the corridor behind them. Harsh voices called out orders. The hunters had found them. Their weapons cast sharp beams of light that cut through the chamber's gloom. They moved with military precision, fanning out to cover the exits. They were not superstitious foot soldiers. These were elite guards. They would not be frightened by stories. Iris's eyes fixed on the dais. The patterns there matched ones from her grandmother's oldest stories. Tales of binding, of gateways. She understood. It requires shared blood and intent, she said, her voice clear despite the fear. It wasn't a question. It was a fact pulled from some deep ancestral memory. Raiden didn't ask for explanation. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a blade from his belt. It was a practical tool, not a weapon. He drew it across his own palm. The cut was clean, deep enough to well blood immediately. He held his hand over the glowing pool. Then he offered the blade to her, handle first. His eyes held no doubt, only a grim acceptance of the necessary cost. Iris took the knife. Her hand was steady. She made a matching cut on her own palm. The pain was sharp, clean. She clenched her fist and blood dripped freely. Raiden reached out. Their bloodied hands clasped together over the center of the dais. Their joined blood fell into the light. The reaction was instantaneous. The light in the pool flared. It wasn't a bright flash. It was a deep, brilliant explosion of radiance that filled the chamber without hurting the eyes. The hum in the air intensified to a deafening roar. The very stone of the walls began to change. It lost its solidity. It shimmered, then flowed like dark water. It moved in slow, heavy waves, reshaping the room around them. The hunters froze. Their confident search became panic. The passage they had entered through sealed shut. The stone flowed across it like a black tide, then hardened in an instant. Another exit vanished. Then another. Their lights flickered across the liquid walls, showing their own frightened reflections. They were trapped. The technology was reconfiguring the environment in response to a command it had not been given by them. The chamber was no longer a room. The walls closed in, then pulled away, forming a tunnel of swirling, solidifying stone. The dais itself began to sink, taking Iris and Raiden with it. The hunters were left behind in sudden, absolute darkness. Their shouts were cut off as the last opening sealed. This was not an escape route. It was a transition. The system had recognized the authenticity of their shared intent. Their blood was a key. Their united purpose was the turning of that key. The technology was not designed for coercion or force. It was built to respond only to voluntary mutual commitment. It was a lock that could not be picked, only answered. The chamber carried them downward into the heart of the rock, leaving the world of hunters and hunted behind. They were moving toward something new. A place built not on fear but on the trust required to bleed together. The chamber dissolved into light. A figure formed from it, featureless and luminous. Its voice was calm without tone. Your trial begins. Face what you fear most. For Iris, the world shifted. She stood whole and strong in her father's throne room. He looked at her with cold approval. She was perfect. Then she felt it, the familiar numbness starting in her legs. Her strength drained away, she fell. His approval twisted into disgust. The fear was not the paralysis. It was the dependency, the burden she would become. The contempt in his eyes mirrored the voice in her own head, the one that whispered she was unworthy of the air she breathed. The luminous guide spoke again. True strength adapts, endures, transforms. The words cut through the memory. Her father's strength was rigid. It broke under pressure. This was something else. For Raiden, the light became a battlefield. The air smelled of smoke and ozone. He saw the settlement on the viewing screen. Orders came through clear. Neutralize the target. He gave the command. The blast was clean, efficient. Then he saw the heat signatures vanish. Not combatants, families, hiding. The fear was not the memory itself. It was the pattern. He was a tool, a weapon aimed by others. His entire life had been a series of commands followed. His own judgment a secondary consideration. He feared he was nothing more than a trigger finger. A function, not a man. The guide's voice was there. Life must be served. Not power, not orders, not even duty. It was a recalibration, a new directive. The trials were not punishments. They were diagnostics. They showed the cracks in their old foundations. Each painful memory was a data point, a failure of their previous definitions of strength. Iris saw her culture's obsession with physical perfection as a weakness, a system so fragile it had to purge anything different. Raiden saw his blind obedience as a failure of moral courage. Hiding behind orders was the easier path. The true test was choosing your own. The guide presented possibilities. For Iris, a future where she ruled with the same rigid cruelty as her father, a world of perfect, sterile strength that stagnated and died. Another where she was a forgotten victim, her potential extinguished in the sand. For Raiden, a future of endless wandering, a ghost haunting the edges of conflict, never engaging, never responsible. Another where he returned to the core, becoming the perfect, unquestioning weapon once more. They were not being judged. They were being shown the map of their own souls. The guide illuminated the paths, but the choice of direction remained theirs. The purpose was integration. To take the shame, the guilt, the fear, and not hide from it. To understand it. To use it as fuel for a different kind of strength. One that was flexible. One that learned. Confronting the past was the only way to build a new future. The trials stripped away the stories they told themselves. The excuses. The justifications. What remained was the raw truth of their choices and their consequences. This was the preparation. You cannot transform what you refuse to acknowledge. The ruins were helping them see themselves clearly for the first time, not as a failed heir or a retired soldier, but as people with a capacity for change. The calibration was complete. The old definitions of strength had been tested and found wanting. Now they could begin building new ones. The water rose around her. It was cool but not cold. A tingle spread through her skin. It felt like a low current moving through her body. Her legs began to burn. The sensation was deep. Muscles that had been silent for years started to twitch. It was not a gentle return. It was a sudden, sharp awakening of nerves long forgotten. But the change was not just in her limbs. Her mind shifted. The world opened. She could feel the patterns in the stone around her. She sensed the hum of the water not as sound but as information. Emotions became clear currents she could almost see. Possibilities branched out from every moment. She understood the old one's wisdom in a way that went beyond words. Strength was not a scarce resource to be guarded. It was abundant potential waiting to be unlocked. Her worth had never been about walking. It was about seeing. She had always noticed things others missed. The slight shift in her father's mood before an outburst. The hidden meanings in ancient texts. Her people valued the obvious strength of muscle and will. They missed the strength of perception. The water did not fix her. It removed a barrier. It unlocked what had always been there, waiting beneath the surface of her conditioned mind. She emerged from the pool changed. It was more than the feeling in her legs, the strength in her own weight standing on them. Her consciousness had expanded. She could feel the edges of the present moment thinning. She could sense multiple futures unfolding from the choices being made now. It was not prophecy. It was probability, a reading of the data inherent in every action and intention. This was the absolute opposite of her father's world. His was a place of less. It sought to narrow, to purify, to eliminate until only a perfect, brittle core remained. This was a world of more. It was wide and inclusive. It saw difference not as a contamination but as a source of new data, new potential. His strength was static. This strength was adaptive. It grew from integration, not exclusion. The transformation was perceptual. She saw the same room, but now she saw the energy flowing through it. She heard the same silence, but now she heard the layers of vibration within it. Her body was whole, but that was the smallest part of the change. The real shift was in how she processed the world. She could feel the intentions of the sanctuary itself, a gentle, guiding presence that wanted only to facilitate growth. Her father's entire philosophy was based on a fear of dilution. He believed strength came from purity. This experience taught her that strength comes from complexity, from the ability to hold multiple truths, multiple potentials at once. She was not healed into a simpler version of herself. She was expanded into a more complex one. The paralysis had been a cage. Now her mind could roam free, and it saw a universe of connection where before she had only seen separation. True transformation is not about becoming someone new. It is about becoming more of who you always were, without the limits you were taught to accept. The waters showed Reedon his life as a soldier, not as a story of honor, but as a sequence of orders followed. He saw the settlements he had cleared, the faces of people who were just data points on a tactical screen. The guilt was an old companion. He had carried it for years. The trial did not erase these memories. It asked him to look at them without flinching. His past did not have to be a chain. It could be a lesson. He saw that serving life meant more than following a command structure. His years of wandering alone were not freedom. They were another kind of prison. Isolation was not a solution. It was an escape. The guide's words were simple. Life must be served, not just lived. The distinction was clear. To live was to exist. To serve was to contribute. To protect. His redemption would not come from forgetting what he had done. It would come from using that knowledge to make better choices, to integrate the shame into a new purpose, not to bury it. His scout training was a tool. It had been used for extraction, for gathering intelligence to be used against others. He saw now that the same skills could be used for protection, for reading a landscape to find safe paths, not vulnerable targets, for anticipating danger to prevent it, not to exploit it. His eyes, trained to notice every detail, could watch for threats to a community, not just to a mission. His meeting with Iris was no accident. It was an intersection of need. She needed his strength to survive. He needed her perspective to remember what he was fighting for. This partnership was a chance to apply the harsh lessons he had learned, not for a flag or a command, but for a person, for a future. He could use his competence to guard a life that others had thrown away. That was a mission he could believe in. He emerged from the water with the same hands, the same skills, the same memories, but they were reoriented. His instincts were now tuned toward connection, not solitude. His strength was for shielding, not striking. The trial's gift was not absolution. It was recontextualization. His entire life was reframed. The guilt was still there, but now it was a compass pointing toward a different north, a reminder of the cost of blind obedience. Purpose transformed his abilities. The knife in his belt was the same. Before it was a tool for survival or for killing. Now it was an instrument for cutting bonds, for clearing paths to safety. His knowledge of terrain was the same. Before it was for ambush and evasion. Now it was for finding shelter and leading others to it. The skills of war became the instruments of peace through a simple shift in intention. He was still a soldier, but his allegiance had changed. He no longer served an army. He served life itself, and in that service he found a redemption that was not about erasing the past, but about building a better future with its broken pieces. The figures that appeared were not ghosts. They were projections. Their forms shimmered with a soft light, but their details were sharp. They were living beings, somewhere else. Their voices were calm, layered, as if many spoke as one. They explained the sanctuary existed at a nexus, a place where realities touched. It was not bound by a single timeline. This was not magic. It was science operating on principles neither Iris nor Ryden could fully grasp. The technology felt like wonder because it was so far beyond their own. Their purpose was not to rule. They were caretakers, guides. They watched many worlds, but they did not interfere. They waited. They intervened only when potential for true growth emerged. They did not seek power. They sought integration. They offered a path, not a command. Iris was more than a discarded heir to a single throne. She was an heir to this broader legacy. Her capacity for change, her will to survive against an unjust system had drawn their attention. Their selection was not based on status or bloodline purity. It was based on need, on intent, on the raw potential they saw in a person's choices. They offered responsibility, not power. The choice to become a bridge, to help different cultures see their shared potential instead of their differences. This was the opposite of conquest. It was connection. They explained that their methods might seem supernatural, but they were based on laws of physics and biology that less advanced cultures simply had not discovered yet. The healing waters, the responsive stone, the trials, all were applications of a science that understood the universe as an interconnected whole. Their criteria remained a mystery. They did not explain how they measured need or judged intent. They simply stated that they acted when the conditions were right. When an individual or a world stood at a crossroads where a gentle nudge could change the course of evolution. They were gardeners, not architects. They cultivated growth from within, rather than imposing a design from without. This was how an advanced civilization could guide development without imposing control. They provided the tools, the sanctuary, the opportunity. The choice to use them always remained with the individual. The caretaker's presence was a quiet reassurance. They were not omnipotent. They were bound by their own ethics and by the complex laws of the realities they navigated. Their intervention came with cost and consequence, a ripple effect they could predict but not always control. They accepted this. Their role required humility. They saw their work as a long, patient process of fostering understanding across the vast distances of space and culture. They were not there to give answers. They were there to help Iris and Ryden find their own. The revelation was not an end but a beginning, a new understanding of the scale on which their lives now mattered. They were no longer just two survivors in a desert. They were a point of contact between worlds, guided by a silent, ancient wisdom that believed in their capacity to choose a better way. The Baron entered the chamber alone. His armor was polished, but his shoulders were not set for battle. He carried no weapon. His hands were open at his sides. He did not look at the stone walls or the glowing water. His eyes went to his daughter. She stood on her own feet. Her posture was straight. Her gaze was clear. He did not see corruption. He saw a calm certainty he had never possessed. The waters of the sanctuary showed him truth. They did not show him visions. They showed him possibilities. He saw the path his rigid rule would lead his people down: stagnation, fear, a slow decline into irrelevance. He saw Iris not as a broken version of his line, but as an evolution of it. She was adapted for a reality he could not yet grasp. Her perception was a form of strength his culture had forgotten how to value. It was not a weakness. It was an upgrade. One of the luminous caretakers spoke. Its voice was calm. Not sorcery, it said. Perception. The ability to see beyond surfaces. The words landed in the quiet room. They explained the technology as a science of clarity. It stripped away illusion. It showed things as they were and as they could be. The Baron had built his entire rule on surfaces, on symbols of strength, on the appearance of control. Now he was seeing the framework beneath. He confronted the fear that had always driven him, the fear that his strength was a performance, a mask for a deep uncertainty. He had eliminated anything that made him question his own perfection. His daughter's difference had been a constant living challenge to that fiction. Abandoning her was not an act of strength. It was an act of terror. He saw that now. The truth was not kind, but it was clean. He looked at Iris. His voice, when he spoke, had no trace of its former authority. It was quiet, humble. I will return not as satrap, but as guide. The surrender of his title was not a defeat. It was an understanding. True leadership was not about holding power over others. It was about elevating them. It was about creating conditions where they could discover their own strength. His old role was obsolete. This moment justified every risk Iris had taken. Her choice to crawl toward the rock, her trust in a stranger, her willingness to be transformed. She had chosen a difficult truth over a comfortable lie. Her father's conversion was the validation of that choice. Power had been offered to her in the waters. She had chosen understanding instead. Now he was choosing it too. His transformation was as radical as hers. He had to dismantle a lifetime of conditioning, a system he had enforced with absolute conviction. He saw that his cruelty was a form of fragility, a need to control what he did not understand. Letting go of that control was the bravest act of his life. It required more strength than any battle he had ever fought. He was not bowing to a greater power. He was accepting a greater responsibility. The role of guide required wisdom, not force. It was a path he would have to learn from the beginning. He was willing to try, seeing the truth had broken him open, and in that broken space something new could finally grow. Iris's awareness expanded. It wasn't a single vision. It was a flood of possibilities. She saw countless branching paths unfolding from each moment. Every choice carried a different outcome. She could feel the emotional currents of the people around her. Their fears, their hopes. These weren't vague feelings. They were data points. Her mind processed them, calculating probabilities with a speed she didn't understand. This was not prophecy. It was a form of advanced cognition, a reading of the inherent data in every situation. She understood then why the Old Ones valued this ability over physical dominance. It prevented conflict. It solved problems before they required force. Strength that wins a fight is simple. Strength that prevents the fight from ever happening is complex. Raiden could sense it too, though less vividly. Their connection, forged in the Sanctuary's trials, gave him a glimpse. He couldn't see the branching paths. He felt them as instincts, a prickle of warning, a sense of rightness about a certain direction. His military mind recognized it as a superior form of intelligence gathering. He could anticipate moves based on emotional states, not just tactical patterns. He saw two clear futures, one where they went their separate ways. In that path he wandered and she ruled alone, isolated by her difference. The other path was harder. It was a future of partnership. It was messy and required constant negotiation, but it was stronger, more resilient. It was built on the integration of their different strengths. The Sanctuary hadn't given them a new power. It had unlocked a latent one. It enhanced a natural human capacity for intuition and pattern recognition. It turned a subtle sense into a clear tool. This changed everything about how they saw power. Domination became a pointless exercise. Why force an outcome when you could guide events toward a better one naturally? Coercion was the tool of those who couldn't see the alternatives. It was a blunt instrument used in the dark. Her new perception turned on the lights. She could see the fissures in an opponent's resolve. She could find the path that led to mutual benefit instead of victory for one side. This was the true evolution the Old Ones had mastered. Not better weapons, but better vision. Forcing a people to obey required constant effort. It created resentment. It built a pressure that would eventually explode. Guiding them toward a shared goal created stability. It built a system that could sustain itself. Her father's rule was based on fear of the alternative. Her potential rule would be based on the visible value of collaboration. The proof was in the data she could now perceive. The futures where cooperation was chosen were consistently more prosperous. The futures of conflict were shorter. They burned bright and died quickly. Advanced perception made the choice obvious. It made the old ways of command look primitive. It wasn't about being right. It was about seeing what works. The Baron would return to Eris not as a conqueror but as a guide. His people expected a story of glorious death or triumphant victory. They had been conditioned to understand power as something taken, not given. He would have to explain a new truth. True strength lies in adaptability, in serving life's expansion rather than enforcing its limitation. His decision to surrender his title was not a defeat. It was an evolution of leadership. His role was no longer to command but to facilitate, to create the conditions where others could discover their own power. Iris considered her own return. She would not come back as a princess reclaiming a throne. She would be a bridge, a living connection between the harsh traditions of her home and the expansive possibilities she had witnessed. Her value was no longer in her bloodline but in her perspective. She could see the patterns that bound her people to a cycle of fear and exclusion. She could also see the paths that led out of it. Their partnership stood as proof. Two beings from different worlds with different strengths had found resilience in collaboration. His tactical mind and her perceptual awareness created a whole neither could achieve alone. It was a practical demonstration that difference is not a weakness. It is a resource. A system that discards what is different discards its own potential for adaptation. Their survival was evidence of a better way. The technology of the Sanctuary would not be forced upon Eris. It would be introduced gradually, as the culture became ready to receive it. This was not a conquest by Earth or by the Old Ones. It was an offer, a chance for mutual evolution. The people would need to see the value for themselves, to choose change instead of having it imposed. The caretakers had modeled this approach. They provided the tools, but the will to use them had to come from within. The legacy of the Old Ones was finally being realized. It was never about building an empire. It was about fostering integration. A network of connections between diverse worlds and perspectives. Their advanced science was not a weapon. It was a means of communication. a way to help different forms of life understand one another. This was the true purpose of their work. It had been waiting centuries for the right people to continue it. The transformation of a society begins with the transformation of its individuals. The Baron's change of heart was the catalyst. His willingness to step down from absolute power created an opening. It allowed a new idea to take root. That leadership could be a form of service. That strength could be measured in flexibility, not rigidity. His personal journey showed his people that even the most entrenched beliefs can change. He was not just telling them to evolve, he was showing them how it was done. This new form of governance would be a living system, not a fixed structure. It would require constant attention, a willingness to listen and adapt. The Council of Elders would govern in his absence, a first step toward shared responsibility. The focus would shift from enforcing rules to nurturing well-being, from controlling outcomes to fostering potential. Power, in its truest sense, had become the ability to serve the growth of others. It was a quieter strength, a more resilient one. It was built not on fear, but on the slow, patient work of building trust. They stood at the edge of the sanctuary's light, looking out into the world they had left behind. The desert stretched before them, vast and silent. They could turn back to their separate lives. He could resume his wandering. She could reclaim her place on Eris. The choice was theirs. The sanctuary had given them the power to see the paths, but the walking was still their own. The waters had shown them the design. Their meeting was not chance. It was an intersection of purpose. Two paths prepared by experience and necessity, converging at a point of mutual need. He had been a weapon in search of a cause. She had been a purpose in search of strength. The desert was the anvil where they were forged together. They turned to each other. The decision was silent. A look was all it took. They would move forward as one. Not as rescuer and rescued, not as protector and protected. They were equals. Partners. Their bond was the story's final truth. Fear had yielded to curiosity. The need for power had become a commitment to service. The transformation was not finished. It was a process. They would continue becoming, together. Each day a new choice. Each challenge a new chance to integrate their strengths. His tactical mind and her perceptual awareness would learn to work as a single instrument. Their pasts were not erased. They were the foundation for this new construction. Two worlds were now joined through their choice. The rigid traditions of Eris and the adaptive resilience of Earth found a common purpose in their partnership. They were a living bridge, a proof that difference is not a threat. It is a resource. Their journey had shown that survival is just the beginning. Evolution is the goal. This was the twist in their tale. Both were heroes. Both had been transformed. Both were necessary. His journey from soldier to guardian was as vital as her journey from outcast to visionary. One could not have succeeded without the other. Their strength was in their combination. The old dynamic of rescue was gone. It had been replaced by partnership. He did not carry her. They supported each other. Her insight guided his action. His strength secured her vision. They moved as a single unit. This equality changed everything. It turned a desperate flight into a deliberate journey. It made survival into something more. It made it evolution. They stepped out of the sanctuary's protective glow. The desert air was still hot, but it felt different now. It was not a killing ground. It was a landscape of possibility. They walked into it side by side. Their steps were steady. Their direction was clear. They were not returning to the old world. They were going to build a new one. The story does not end here, it begins. Their bond is the engine of it, a quiet promise made at the edge of the unknown, to walk forward together. True strength isn't about never falling. It's how you rise. It's adaptation, endurance. The universe sends what we need, not always as expected, sometimes disguised as loss. Iris and Ryden's story continues. It lives wherever someone sees potential in discarded things, where a broken tool gets mended, where a different mind gets heard. It's a quiet choice, to look past the surface, to value spirit over form, to build with the pieces others threw away. Their journey is a map, for when the old ways fail, for finding a new path forward, together.